we're back with another episode of the Wrapped in Skin podcast. I'm your host, Justin Jamar Grooms. As always, I always say this. I appreciate everyone who supported me thus far, supported this project, and continues to tune in on a consistent basis. I hope you've gleaned some information, some insight, some inspiration that has led you to revelation over the course of this past 5 or so weeks. This is episode number 6. And a lot of times when I start doing this or doing these podcasts, I have some idea of what I want to talk about. You know, God has revealed some things to me that He wants me to discuss and unpack. And but I'm also trying to be consistent, right? So it's kind of sometimes that juxtaposition between when we want to do a thing and how we want to do a thing in our timeline versus God. And when you're seeking revelatory experiences and revelations from God, it doesn't always come in that consistent time frame where, I want to put this out weekly, so I'm just going to do it. And I never wanted to fall into that trap where I am just kind of doing stuff out of my own will, because honestly, this takes up a lot of time and a lot of energy, and I could be deploying that into some other stuff, some other business ventures. But anyway, and this is not a business venture, by the way. This is, again, just something I feel called and led to do. That being said, I almost decided that I wasn't going to put one out this week. You know, like it's the holidays, I can skip a week, right? So I decided that I wasn't going to do it, but unless God moved, and as always, God moves, right? And so, you know, I started thinking, I kind of realized that from the beginning of this, I mean, obviously, if you listen to the first 3 episodes that we did at the beginning of the year, you got some insight into kind of who I am and what the book is about, what my mindset is around everything, essentially. But mainly when it comes to purpose and living a purpose-filled life and what that looks like, right? So if you listen to the first 3 episodes, you may have gotten a glimpse into that, you know, a little bit of my background and my history. But you know, honestly, I haven't spent a lot of time telling you about who I am and how I arrived at kind of this point where I'm at. And we don't have enough time to talk about my entire backstory, but I thought it'd be good to just give you some insight into why I think the way I think, some of my experiences, and just kind of unpack some of that stuff. So that's what this is going to be. This is really going to be me giving you a little bit about my backstory. And kind of what made me think about this even more is a couple of weeks ago I did a podcast. I was a guest on a friend of mine's podcast. Shout out to Pastor Keith Allen at Purpose Place LA. But you know, he asked me a lot of questions about my own personal story, my origin story, and I thought, look, man, I haven't even done that really on my podcast. So I wanted to take some time again to kind of talk about me, where I come from, and again, how I arrived here. Now, I've told this story before. Maybe some of you know this and some of you don't, but I felt like a move of God early on when I was a kid, before I even knew what that term meant. Move of God. What does it mean to have a realization that you are having an experience with something outside of yourself, right? And so I was like 7 years old, and my mom we had a revival at church. And those of you who are from the South or who grew up in a Southern Baptist household, you would know about revivals. I mean, revivals all over the place, but something about a Southern Baptist revival, right? So we had all these speakers coming in from different places to talk to us, to speak. And part of the reason that we had so many different preachers come in that revival week was because our pastor was about to retire, right? And we were actually using the revival as an opportunity to kind of audition new pastors. And so this pastor preached, Pastor James Brazier, and he is, he was my pastor growing up. He actually got the job, and he was the pastor that kind of helped develop me early on in my spiritual walk. So long story short, he preached, brought the house down. Everybody was, shouting, falling out in the spirit. And I just remember feeling, they opened the doors of the church, and I remember feeling this gentle kind of push is the only way I can describe it. I didn't hear an audible voice. I didn't hear any sound. It was just a gentle push from within that said to me, or that meant to me, that I was supposed to go that day and give my life to God. But I had no idea what that even meant. So I stood up, and they opened the doors of the church. I stood up. My mom looked at me like, what are you doing? And I said, I don't know. I think I'm supposed to go up front. So she let me go up front. So I went up front. The pastor was retiring, Pastor Lander at the time. He said to me, son, what are you doing up here? And I said, well, I think I'm supposed to give my life to God today. And he said, what does that mean to you? I said, well, I accept Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior. Repent for my sins. Everything that I had learned in Sunday school is what I regurgitated that day. And so I got baptized. But, obviously at 7 years old, you don't understand what it really means to have a relationship with God. But I felt like I had been led. So that kind of started my journey of being at least interested in something outside of myself, right? This knowing that there was something bigger than me that was moving things around and that was in control. So that was the first time I really realized that I was not in complete control, right? So fast forward, grew up in church, but just like any kid, I had interests outside of the church. It just so happened that my mom was heavily involved in church, Sunday school teacher, sang in the choir, all that stuff. So, and again, I've said this before, we were at church a lot. I mean, it didn't seem crazy to us at the time, but we were in church a lot. Sundays for sure, Tuesdays, choir rehearsal, something was going on Wednesday, prayer meeting, whatever. My mom actually also took care of the church, so we would go on Saturdays and help clean the pews and vacuum and all that stuff. So we were in church a lot. Summertime, we were in Bible competitions, and so I had that upbringing. I had a real church kind of upbringing. It was a thing to do to go to church on Sunday, and until we did that, we couldn't do anything else. So it was all good. And then I lost my mom at 14. A lot of you know I lost my mom at 14, and that kind of really changed my relationship with not only church but with God for sure, because I was angry. I had questions, and up to that point I had been taught that you don't question God. Like, God does things and he has his own motives, and you don't question those motives. And I was mad because I couldn't question them, or I thought I couldn't question them. I had no idea why this was happening, what it meant. And then to be told that you shouldn't question God about what was going on gave me again this deep sense of frustration with the whole situation. Obviously, it's outside of my control, but then you can't even ask the person who's in control why something is happening. So from 14 to 18, now this sounds counterintuitive, but from 14 to 18, as someone who was angry with God, I didn't miss a Sunday at church. So I was at church every Sunday from 14 to 18. And the primary reason I was at church that much was because I didn't want to let my mom down, right? So I didn't want to come across as someone who was disobedient to what his mother had told him. So really the whole reason I was going to church was just because I wanted to fulfill something that she wanted me to do. But I was tuned out. Like, literally the whole time I can't tell you anything consciously that I retained. Obviously there were some things that happened during that time that I retained, some things that were said that guided me throughout the course of my life. But I was sitting in church basically like a robot every Sunday. And so needless to say, by the time I got to college, I was done with church. Like, I wasn't interested in going. I didn't have any desire to go. And I can count on one hand how many times I went to church while I was in college. 4 years of undergraduate school, a year of grad school, and I can count on one hand. Now, that didn't mean that I didn't feel like I had a relationship, but I did what most people do. I shouldn't say most people, that's an overgeneralization, but what a lot of people do, they say, oh man, I got a relationship with God. I don't need to go to church. I don't need that. Like I can sit in my house and have a relationship with God. God is everywhere. And that is true. God is everywhere. But there's something about gathering yourself together, belonging to a community that really strengthens and galvanizes your relationship with God. It fortifies it. There's something about being together with people who are on the same journey, who are going through the same issues and dealing with some of the same situations that you're dealing with, that you can lean on and learn from. I didn't know anything about mentorship. I didn't know anything about discipleship. I didn't know anything about group connections and corporate prayer or any of that stuff. And so I was kind of separated from the power of God in that space. And, that kind of started me on this journey. Now, my whole goal was obviously at that point in college to just really focus on getting a degree, getting a job, having a little fun in the meantime. So I did all that. I had a lot of fun, did a lot of things wrong, but by the grace of God, didn't get in any major trouble. I was one of these kids. I used to fight a lot for whatever reason, but I didn't really get any major trouble. But my relationship with God was distant. I felt God was, now at times I felt him strongly, but I almost ran from it, right? I always felt his presence, but I didn't embrace it, right? It was almost like, God's here, but I don't need to know any more about him than I do already, right? I didn't feel like I needed to grow in my relationship with God because, again, in my mind, I know God. I knew God at 7. I'm the kid that got baptized at 7 years old during a revival. I know God, but I didn't, right? I knew him from an existential standpoint. I theoretically knew God, but I had no idea what that meant. So, I'm not going to tell you my entire backstory, but, I get to a place where I'm wrestling with this idea of what do I want to keep going down this traditional career path, or do I want to try something different? Because as I told you, I'm feeling God is calling me to do something. Now, to back up just a little bit, around the same time that my mom passed away, which was when I was 14, I felt that God had given me some clear instruction as to what I should do for him and how I should serve him. And that was through writing and speaking. I started writing around that same time. I had been speaking in church in front of people since I was about 10 years old. But to me, that meant, oh, you want me to be a preacher? Now, I'm not interested. I'm not, everything I knew about preaching, that's not my thing. So even though I knew I had a call on my life, I wasn't interested because I didn't know what that would look like for me and for my future. And again, all I wanted to do was go get a job, make a lot of money, have some kids, get the house, the cars, all that stuff. So that's what I was interested in. And none of that looked like preaching or pastoring a church. So, I was on this journey after I graduated college to figure out what I really wanted to do. I got the degree, and I tell people this all the time. The reason I got the degree primarily was because my mom had instilled in me and instilled in my brother that that's just the natural thing to do. You go to college, you get a job, so you don't have to struggle like I struggled. And so I just followed her blueprint. This is what she said do. Go to church every Sunday, go to college, get a degree, get a master's degree, get a job. Now after that, the instructions were done because she was gone. So that was the last thing that she had told me. And I did it. And now I'm like, all right, now what do I do? Now this is where I needed to lean on God. But again, remember, over the past 6 years, the relationship had been, I should say probably over 10 years up to that point, from 14 until about 24, my relationship with God was shaky at best. And so I didn't even know how to go to God for direction and revelation. So it started a long journey of me trying to figure out what I was supposed to do in my life. And because I was confused, and this is the thing that I want you to get, when you are confused about what it is God is telling you to do, it's easy to fall victim to whatever whims of the world are out there, right? There are traps and snares, and if you don't have a definiteness of direction, it's easy to get blown here, there, and everywhere. So that's what was happening. I was kind of blown here, there, and everywhere. So fast forward to about 2013, I was going through a rough patch. And if you read the book, you'll read about this in the book. But I talk about some situations I was in, and I just remember one time sitting in this little 1-bedroom apartment. I don't even think I had the lights on at the time. Not literally physically turned on. I don't think that the lights were on. Like I didn't have power at the time. And I just remember having this conversation with God about you have to show me what you want me to do. If I'm going to get out of this situation, you're going to have to get me out of this situation. It's out of my realm of ability. I cannot do this under my own power and strength. And I used to go to this coffee shop around the corner just to kind of try to figure things out, right? I would write stuff down, ideas, business plans, all this stuff, like just trying to figure stuff out. And I would listen to different speakers. Now, when I finished grad school, I moved to Orlando. One morning I was getting up, getting ready for work, and I turned on the TV and I came across this broadcast. I can't even remember what station it was, why it was playing in Orlando, but it was Pastor Jamal Bryant, who pastored at that time in Baltimore at a church. And he was, if you heard him back in his younger days, like he was just going all out, right? And it was the first time I'd seen a pastor that young with that much enthusiasm preaching the way he was preaching. And it made me late for work. I was listening to a sermon for so long. So I had discovered him, and then that led me to other speakers. And so I started listening to these sermons when I was, right after grad school. But as with most things, you go through a season where you're really involved, and then you're not so much. So I probably hadn't listened to him since then, and this is probably 5-6 years later. Anyway, I'm at this coffee shop. I come across this sermon that he preached, and I cannot find this sermon to this day. I cannot find it. I've tried to look for it. I don't know where it's at, but I believe the title of the sermon was "I Am Responsible," and I listened to it. And when I tell you, it convicted me in a way that I've never been convicted before, because essentially all of these things I was asking God for, all I was asking him to do, what I first needed to understand and admit to myself that a lot of the decisions that I had made had led me to this place. So it's one thing to realize that you can't do anything under your own power and control and authority. It's another thing to realize that a lot of the things and decisions that we're making, we brought on ourselves, right? So I had to get to a place of acceptance that I was responsible for the situation I had found myself in based on the choices I had made, right? That was the first place. I listened to that sermon, I promise you. I listened to that sermon every day, every morning at about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning for 30 days until it really sunk in that I needed to take responsibility and become accountable for the man I would eventually become or not, and stay in this place of self-pity and questioning my purpose and my intention. And so after about 35 days, I started to really hear from God again, right? And this time, as opposed to when I was 7 and I felt like this, just this sensation inside, I was getting clear directives. And I could distinguish for the first time because a lot of times throughout the course of my life, when I got moves of God or downloads from God, I always had a hard time distinguishing between whether or not it was my voice or his voice. But this time, there was no doubt that it was the voice of God that was giving me some insight and inspiration into what I should do. So much so that I can't tell you how many notebooks I burned through just writing down streams of consciousness and revelation that I was getting about my life and about the people around me and their lives. And so I started writing again. I started writing when I was like 14, I told you. But when I was in college, I lost my entire notebook of poems and short stories, and I decided I wasn't going to write again. So I hadn't written for about, 7, 8 years at this point. So I started writing and just started writing down everything that God was giving me in the way that it was being given to me. 2 years later, about a year and a half later, God said, all right, I need you to put this in a book. And I'm like, well, first of all, I don't even think I write well enough to put things in a book. And if I wanted to, I don't know how to start. Like, I don't know anyone who's ever published a book. I don't even know what that means. Like, what do I do? How do I go through this process? But I've always been a figure it out kind of guy, which has gotten me in trouble at times, by the way. But I've always been a let's bootstrap it, let's figure this thing out. And so once I wrestled with God a little bit back and forth about whether or not I should do this, how I was going to do it, I just started the process of trying to figure it out. Now, a lot of things I would have done differently about Wrapped in Skin if I had to go do it over again. But in that book, again, encapsulates my journey and what I believe God has purposed me to do in this life. And, there were times when after the book came out, I'm thinking, man, what did I do? I put all my life in this book, and not all my life literally, but I talked about personal stuff in the book. I kind of exposed myself a little bit in the book, and I second guessed it. I second guessed it right up to the point, which it was about 2 months after I released it. I'm sitting at this event. It was an agency party. So my agency had a party. My talent agent had a party, a holiday party at this little venue. Now, we were only utilizing one side of the venue, and the other side of the venue was open to the public. And as I'm sitting in the party, I don't know about you, but when I get around crowds, man, sometimes my social battery gets drained very quickly. It hasn't always been that way, but it gets drained very quickly. And so my social battery was getting drained, and I was like, it's pretty early. I'm not really ready to leave yet, but I need to get away from this group. So I went to the other side of the venue where regular customers were at. And so I go and I sit at the bar. There's a girl sitting beside me, and so we strike up a conversation. And clearly she is not having the greatest day, greatest week. She's taking shots after shot after shot. And so we strike up a conversation. I won't tell you what all we talked about during the conversation, but it was a relatively brief conversation, but it was a good discussion. But in the conversation somewhere, I mentioned to her about Wrapped in Skin, that I'd written this book. I didn't tell her a lot about the book. I wasn't preaching to her or anything like that. I just kind of mentioned it in passing that, oh yeah, by the way, I write, and I just published a book. I don't know how it's going to do, blah, blah, blah. And then we continued talking. We talked about other stuff. And I didn't think anything else about it. I went back to the other side. She continued to sit at the bar. About 6 months later, I get a message on Facebook from some random person, and it is literally the longest. I don't know how she even was allowed to send a message this long. I thought there were limits on how long your messages could be, but she sent a message. I printed it out. It was about 4 pages long, this message, and it was the girl from the bar, and she proceeds to tell me that after we had that interaction that night, she leaves, ends up getting a DUI, goes to jail. While she's in jail, her girlfriend, the girl she was seeing at the time, who she had been having, which is what we spent the bulk of the time talking about, her relationship, and ended up breaking up with her, wouldn't help her get out of jail. She lost her job while she was in jail. So anyway, her life was already spiraling at the time we talked, but at this point it had spiraled completely out of control. So when she does get out of jail, she has no one to talk to. There's no one to kind of receive her. So she's drinking even more. She's experimenting with drugs, all this stuff. And she gets another DUI. Now, this time they suspend her license completely. I think they ended up impounding her car. So anyway, she's going through a lot of stuff, needless to say. And she said for some reason, she remembered the conversation we had and talking about the book. And so she gets online, she orders the book, and she said to me that reading that book changed her life. Now, I told y'all this before that one of the most important things I've written, and my favorite thing that I've ever written, is this quote, and it says, "There's a life in the crowd, and perhaps just one, who needs me, and if my voice finds its way to them, then my life has indeed been worth the living." And as I'm in my head about, man, nobody's buying this book, or nobody's gonna buy this book, or what am I thinking I can even be an author, and who's this gonna impact, and why did I do this? Why did I spend all my time on this? And then I get that message, and it was like, if this is all that ever comes out of the last year and a half of 2 years, or 2 years, then this is more than enough to be able to have some sort of impact on someone who's dealing with the situation. Even talking about it right now makes me feel, makes me get emotional, just kind of talking about it right now. But and again, I said that most of the time when I start these podcasts, I have some sort of idea what I want to talk about, where I want it to go, and then I always want to leave you with something. And I think right now, what I want to leave you with is, no matter what you feel that the impact of your work is, no matter what you feel your importance is to people around you, to the greater good of the community, the world as a whole, whether or not you feel like you're having as much impact as you want to have, if you are doing it because God has placed something deep down inside of you and is guiding you and pushing you to do it, then it doesn't matter how you consciously think it's happening, or what impact it's having. Because as long as you're motivated by the move of God on the inside of you, as long as you're motivated by the Holy Spirit, as long as you're motivated by good intentions, as long as you're living by those 3 tenets that I talked about a few episodes ago, the idea that, number 1, I want to daily enrich myself. Number 2, I want to daily serve people. And number 3, I want to daily add more to the world and not take away from it. If you can look at whatever project or job or industry or whatever you're doing, if you can look at it through the lens of those 3 things, and you're constantly checking those boxes, then I would say continue to do it. Forget about, again, this idea of what kind of impact is it having? How's it being received? If your intentions are pure, if your motivation comes from the source, then continue to do it, and it will do what it's supposed to do. It may not do what you want it to do when you want it to do it, but it will do what it's supposed to do. So yeah, I thought I wanted to give a little bit of insight of who I am and where I come from and what my mindset is around all this stuff, and why I know for a fact that God is the only one who can show me what I should do, when I should do it, how I should do it. And if I lean into my own understanding, I will always get it wrong. We'll always get it wrong, because I can only see today. I can't see tomorrow or the next day or the day after that. But I know someone who can. And so if I trust in his vision, then I'll be okay. As always, I love y'all. I appreciate y'all. And for this time, while you're wrapped in the skin, you will be, if you choose it to be so, the very best of God. Y'all be good. Love y'all. Don't eat too much turkey. That's a wrap for this episode, pun intended. I want to thank you for joining us. We hope that you learned something about yourself. Hopefully you heard something that you had otherwise never thought of in that way. We welcome your comments. Please share, subscribe, talk about this with your friends. Our goal is to talk next time about something that you want to hear specifically. So comment, Message us, email us, let us know what you want to hear, what you want us to talk about, what you thought about this episode, and we'll catch you next time. It'll be good.